What if the wedding album was actually a balance sheet? Some marriages at the top aren't about vows, they're line items. They come with deliverables, quarterly reports, and PR cycles. They can be bought, traded, insured, and, when convenient, written off. In the city of Yanjing, where boardrooms sit beside fashion runways and tabloids publish earnings forecasts in the same breath as relationship rumors, marriage is rarely private. It is a contract between a public figure and an industry that profits when intimacy is performative. This is the anatomy of one such system and the people who live inside it. On paper, Shen Mo is a husband. In practice, he is a brand with a family portfolio. Xiao Ye is a rival with a matching portfolio and similar clauses. Lin Ruo Xi is listed in the contract as a wife. Legally and ceremonially, she is everything a modern first lady of industry should be: polished photos, gracious speeches, marketable sorrow. Gu Mian, Mian Mian to those who know her, is the pragmatic one who learned early that survival in Yanjing depends on currency that isn't measured in bank accounts. If you want deep dives into toxic celeb corporate culture, hit subscribe and stay with me. There is no quick scandal here. This is a slow, engineered ecosystem of leverage, image, and incentives. Let me show you how it works. They called it the stand-in marriage. The phrase was a euphemism because calling it what it literally was, an arranged transactional union, would have been too blunt for the PR. The world needed romance. The shareholders needed stability. The tabloids needed narrative. So the stand-in offered all three: a committed image without the messy unpredictability of mutual affection. Shen Mo's marriage to Lin Ruo Xi began as a strategic asset allocation. He needed a face that softened his cruelty in public, a gentle presence for charity gala photos, someone who could translate corporate statements into sympathetic human language. Lin Ruo Xi needed protection, status, and a safety net in a city that demanded women trade privacy for security. To those watching, it was an elegant compromise. To the players, it was a marketplace. How does a marriage like that run day to day? Imagine a scoreboard, not unlike those you see in a reality show. Favorability meters, engagement graphs, trending topics. Except the meter is real. Social media teams, PR operatives, and corporate crisis managers treat affection as a KPI. A smile at the right camera brings brand deals. A staged private argument leaked at the right time increases public sympathy and boosts streaming for the show he's producing. The affection meter is not metaphoric. It exists as spreadsheets and dashboards that dictate who gets privileges and who gets cut. System 12587 was the most honest part of it: an app, an algorithm, and a contract engine that turned emotional calculus into executable missions.
Lin Ruo Xi woke one morning to a notification from System 12587. Mission assigned: maintain favorability above 63% for 30 days. Reward: financial settlement plus relocation option. In the world she inhabited, rewards had line items and expiration dates. System 12587 measured attendance at charity events, sympathetic comments on live streams, and the number of times a spouse publicly corrected a rumor. It sent reminders like a stern accountant. Tonight's banquet, be seen laughing with Shen Mo for 7 to 12 seconds. There is something grotesque about being advised by a machine how to court your own future. But the system was truth-teller and jailer at once. For Lin Ruo Xi, it was a map through the landmines. For Shen Mo, it was a tuning fork, a way to modulate public affection without ever opening his private heart. For the women under it, it was both a guide and a barometer of disposability. Let me be clear about Shen Mo. He is not a cartoon villain. He learned to care economically, like a financier who invests emotionally only where yields are highest. Sometimes he could be capricious. Sometimes there were moments that looked dangerously like tenderness. Whether those moments were sincere or a better hedge is indefinitive. What is not ambiguous is the pattern. People are assets, and affection is reallocated to whoever improves the balance sheet. The first cinematic note is a banquet. They arrived under lights that made everything glossy. Cameras braided into the cloth. Influencers waited with airbrushed smiles. Shen Mo, in a suit that cost a year's salary for some of his staff, took Lin Ruo Xi's hand in public. He said the things he was paid to say: praises about charity work, hints at domestic harmony, lines that would trend. On the red carpet, Lin Ruo Xi performed the role with the immaculate economy of someone who has learned to keep her face unconcerned while her mind calculates exits. A younger woman appeared across the room, not a bride, not a model, but a purposefully visible presence, Xiao Ye. He had the celebrity kind of confidence that shifts the room. In this ecosystem, Xiao Yan functioned like a market signal, a high-status endorsement that reassigned shares of public desire. Shen Mo's gaze lingered, not because he loved her, in definitive, but because visibility mattered. Models of masculinity in Yanjing were measured by who they could attract without militarizing their image. At that moment, the banquet did its work. It reshuffled attention, and someone else's favor increased. That same night, they set the fire. It was a deliberate spectacle, a staged incident in a rented villa meant to create a headline. The official story would read as an accident. The underlying calculus was mercilessly logical. A public threat, then heroic rescue, would boost both sympathy and the narrative of a protective husband. The PR team scripted it down to the last breath.
Cameras would catch the panic, the brave rescue pose. Trending topics would follow about courage, sacrifice, and family first. Lin Ruo Xi knew the script. She had been taught how to fall like it mattered, how to clutch at smoke for the cameras without inhaling too deeply. On cue, the fire alarm wailed. Men in suits ushered guests into safety. Shen Mo emerged, face streaked with staged soot on one side, his arm around Lin Ruo Xi in a tableau that would sit on millions of feeds. The favorability meter spiked. Sponsors called. A villa owner got a call for damage coverage. Settlements were drawn up, and System 12587 logged the rescue as a successful mission. Boost favorability plus 9.2%. Not all staged crises go as planned. The night the smoke should have burned only professionally, it almost burned a life. Someone forgot that real flames have a mind of their own. A lamp tipped. Smoke became thick faster than rehearsals anticipated. Lin Ruo Xi's throat stung with true smoke for the first time. The cameras, gloriously indifferent, kept rolling. This is the part of the trade that makes people sick, when the lines between performance and peril blur. The system rewards spectacle, but does not underwrite risk in any meaningful way. Insurance covers kilowatts and set damage, but not the long-term cost of a woman's lungs, or the quiet panic she carries after pretending to choke for likes. That cost is off-ledger. Gumian watched from the edge of that same villa, her shoulders a study in contained fury. She had been an ally and a competitor to Lin Ruo Xi, and in a world that designs scarcity, allies are also rivals. Gumian's survival was more pragmatic. She had learned to take the system's rewards and invest them into options that kept her mobile. While Lin Ruo Xi asked the system for safety and affection, Gumian asked for exits. After the staged fire, there were two types of meetings. One was the glossy affair, celebrated in headlines, Shen Mo, husband of the year. The other happened in the back room, with legal teams and personal assistants, where numbers were shifted and clauses were activated. Shen Mo signed auto-renewal bonuses in the name of family protection. He authorized a black card for Lin Ruo Xi, an account designed to keep public image intact and private needs obscured. Banks were involved. Lawyers drafted muted non-disclosure agreements. System 12587 sent a passive notification. Mission complete. Favorability maintained above 72% for 7 days. Reward unlocked. But not everything is purchasable. There are humiliations that money does not repair. Let me sketch the banquet that followed. Different from the earlier one. Smaller, meant for a select few. Shen Mo's circle had rules. The wife was to be visible, but confirmably subordinate. In private rooms, his language shifted. To his inner circle, he could be possessive with a tone that felt like ownership. To the public, he was a benevolent patriarch.
The dual performance required actors who could project different scripts to different audiences. At that banquet, a rumor was planted. Lin Ruo Xi was unseasonably emotional. It started with a slur from an influencer, then a push from a blog, then a shallow, calculated smear that called into question her competence. The smear was not created by random gossip. It was seeded strategically. Shen Mo's team watched the rumor's trajectory and decided whether to crush or cultivate it. Favorability had to be balanced. Too much warmth toward a celebrity like Xiao Yuan could lessen Lin Ruo Xi's pitiable charm. Too much humiliation could make her uninsurable. Their tools were simple and brutal. Public microgesture, private monetary nudge. Lin Ruo Xi was instructed to apologize in a way that made her appear contrite but dignified. She was given lines that read well in a photograph. I always strive to be better. The cameras loved the performative repentance. The meter adjusted. The market accepted her as a flawed yet redeemable fixture. It's in these moments the system reveals itself as a game with designed incentives. Participants learn quickly that vulnerability, staged or authentic, is monetizable if framed. This is how survival strategies develop. For Lin Ruo Xi, the formula was clear: comply, collect, and keep an escape plan burning slowly in the background. For Gu Mian, the formula skewed more toward leverage. Make it clear you can leave at any time, and you'll be treated as an asset too valuable to abandon. Power, in Yanjing, is often the illusion of choice. Then the pool confrontation happened. Pools are public stages, wet mirrors where image and truth both show differently. The afternoon was humid. A promotional shoot had demanded bubble machines, sparkling water, the sort of staged playfulness that reads as intimacy on camera. The production team arranged competitors as extras. Tension is good for ratings. Conflict is even better. Chao Yuan, uninvited but intentionally present, moved through the set like a catalyst. Shen Mo watched Chao Yuan from a distance that said, "I am aware," which in that world is enough to throw all affects into tizzies. Gu Mian pushed the envelope. She had been building leverage by drifting closer to public platforms and cultivating a sincere versus staged persona. When she walked by the pool, she did not pretend. She brushed past Lin Ruo Xi, and a slip of contact was shown like a sting. A camera caught a hand on a shoulder. Rumors metastasized into headline fodder. Is Gu Mian rising? Is Lin Ruo Xi losing favor? Even a small splash could be amplified into a narrative arc. Shen Mo stepped into the water theatrically, a calculated move. His body language was a message to two audiences: the press, which needed drama and loyalty, and the women who needed to be reminded that their image was inescapably tied to his. He weighed the entertainment value against the risk. The conversation that night included offers and threats, disguised as offers. Lin Ruo Xi received a call from her manager. "Take the villa in Qingdao. Lay low. The board is nervous. If you withdraw, we'll secure your settlement." An offer is rarely neutral. It felt to Lin Ruo Xi like being shown the back door of a mansion and told to exit quietly. She thought about that back door. She cataloged all the moments she had been asked to move, to contort for cameras, to smile when it hurt. She had been promised safety, but given choreography. The villa was an exit and a quarantine. To accept was to agree to be an asset off stage. To refuse was to risk a messy public unraveling. Between spectacle and survival, there is a law of diminishing returns. The more you stage your life, the less real any rescue becomes. Mistakes accumulate. The system assumes we are rational actors and that incentives will shape choices predictably. But people improvise. They bargain with fear. They make unpredictable bids for freedom. That unpredictability is how the idea of faking death took root. It began as a rumor in a private chat among women tired of the calculus. What if the only way to break the contractual dance was to make the market think you were gone? In a business where loss drives value, sympathy, memorial streams, donation drives, a staged death could redirect capital in unexpected ways. It could puncture the system's reliance on visible management. It could, for a moment, make the body untouchable. The proposal was monstrous in its pragmatism and elegant in its logic. A fake death would force the CEOBros to reveal what they truly valued. Would Shen Mo grieve? Would his affection meter show genuine loss, or would his public production teams merely recalibrate for brand advantage? Gu Mian, ever the strategist, laid out risks. A fake death has costs beyond the ledger: legal complications, the chance of being truly harmed, the moral and emotional toll. But the alternative, years of being cataloged and sold, felt like a slow death anyway. Lin Ruo Xi felt the plan as both salvation and sacrilege. She had not intended to die, even figuratively. Her life had been about negotiating for small freedoms, saving enough advantage to step away someday. But the idea of a single, dramatic severing had a seductive purity. In an economy of appearances, nothing clears a file like a closed obituary. They tested the idea with small simulations. One night they staged a near miss, an accidental blackout that required a staged evacuation of an apartment. System 12587 recorded metrics: viewer engagement during simulated chaos, sympathetic donation spikes tied to a private memorial fund, and the market reaction when a high-status man issued a public statement. The numbers were intoxicating. "If you go, they will spend," Gu Mian said bluntly. "They will buy memorial tributes. People give to causes when they feel moral urgency." Her tone was not cruel. It was a report.
The plan escalated. The women rehearsed disappearing. They practiced the narrative frames they would leave behind. A text from Lin Ruo Xi to a friend. A staged last social media post. Perhaps a carefully timed misfortune. Timing mattered. It had to be plausible, tailored to Shen Mo's calendar and the media cycle. They needed to ensure that the story would be large enough to be believed, but not so suspicious as to attract forensic investigation. They wanted an in-between, dead enough to be mourned, alive enough to hide. On the night they tested the gas incident, the villa's cleaner left a pan on the stove. It was practiced sloppiness. The idea was to simulate a lapse that could justify an evacuation and a later misfortune without forensic red flags. Someone mixed a mild amount of carbon monoxide in a controlled area, about the exact dosage, hoping for an incapacitation rather than an actual kill. They carried oxygen tanks and paramedic numbers in their pockets. Safety measures were part of the rehearsal, as was the knowledge that rehearsals can go wrong. They wanted to measure the reaction. Would Shen Mo call emergency services? Would he post a public expression of concern? Or would he, as many suspected, step back, calculating the PR impact before acting? The answer would tell them where they stood, whether they were loved or merely useful. That night, Lin Ruo Xi's vision blurred the way it does in low oxygen. Pink halos around light, a muffled sense of sound. Gu Mian guided her to a window and opened it wide. The cameras outside caught a frame of a woman propped against a windowsill with hair damp and makeup askew. A perfect, pitiful image. Screenshots were already circulating by the time Lin Ruo Xi could tell whether the dizziness was real or staged. Shen Mo's response was swift for a man of his access. He arrived in a car that cut through the evening like a blade. He did not, in a way that mattered, rush to the hospital. He stood in the doorway, measured and composed, and allowed photographers to capture the tableau. He issued a statement about deep concern and valuing family safety. System 12587 logged the response, offering a statistical readout of public sentiment shift in real time. Favorability ticked upward. Sponsors called. Here is the crucial observation. In these systems, the incursion of danger is often measured and monetized before compassion is actualized. Shen Mo's first priorities, in sequence and frequency, can be mapped like a flowchart. Image stabilization, fan management, legal counsel, and then possibly private care. The order is not always the same. Sometimes private care comes first. Sometimes it does not. Whether his actions were motivated by genuine feeling, performative necessity, or a blend of both is indefinitive. What is clear is that his first public move was calibrated to preserve the asset.
These rehearsals and near escapes fed into a larger theory among women in the system. If you can force the CEOBros to produce public worry, you can extract concessions. Corrupt economies tend to respond predictably. When an asset is endangered, the owner often offers more protection. If the asset is no longer necessary, the owner cuts ties. A fake death could be used as leverage. Get a settlement, a change in contract, a written promise of non-interference. In other words, they weaponized mourning. But systems have countermeasures. Shen Mo's team did not sleep. He hired private investigators, floodgated social channels, and readied disclaimers. He also had a playbook of his own, one that included buying loyalty with lavish compensations, creating new favorites to redirect attention, and setting smaller traps to test sincerity. The game is reflexive. For every attempt at escape, the system evolves a defense that absorbs or neutralizes it. In the days after the gas test, a new variable entered the equation: pregnancy. The notification was not cinematic. It came with trembling and a muffled laugh, a late-night test in the bathroom lit by screen light that turned a moment of private fear into strategic consequence. The pregnancy was unexpected, for both women and for System 12587, which did not have a parameter for unplanned biological events. The algorithm sputtered. It did not quite know how to treat a body that promised new dependency, yet concealed agency. Pregnancy changes the accounting. In Yanjing's market logic, a pregnancy can increase perceived vulnerability and thus market value, but it also complicates mobility. It can strengthen legal claims, trigger new PR narratives, and create grounds for long-term financial negotiations. The algorithm flagged it as unusual. System 12587 updated the mission. If pregnant, adjust favorability targets and enable maternity protections. That update was cold, clinical, and instructive. Even in biological contingency, the system's priority was metrics. Gu Mian's voice when she saw the test was pragmatic. "This will change everything," she said. "It can protect you, or it can trap you." Lin Ruo Xi felt the words in her spine. Her mind flickered between relief, fear, and a fierce, pure selfishness. If this child could be a real claim to herself, an irreducible human bond outside of the balance sheet, then perhaps the ledger would be forced to account for more than performative care. Neither woman knew what Shen Mo would do. Neither understood his inner calculus. He could respond with genuine protection and paternal attention. He could weaponize the pregnancy as a public claim to family and control. He could, in a cold scenario, find a way to monetize the situation. All of those outcomes were plausible. Which one would occur was indefinitive. There is a cold humor in how the system treats new life, as an attached variable in a larger cost-benefit analysis.
distributors called.
Legal teams drafted contingency clauses. The PR department polished the family narrative. Personal assistants scheduled doctor visits and risk assessments. The invisible thing that people outside the inner circle do not see is the speed with which private life is translated into corporate strategy. Meanwhile, on social feeds, the affection meter no longer told the full story. Pregnancy skews metrics in ways that confuse simple dashboards. People cut through sentimentality and make choices they do not always realize they are making. A baby provides narrative inertia. It slows the market's appetite for spectacle in certain directions, but it also intensifies scrutiny. It forces an industry good at spectacle to decide whether to protect or to exploit. At the edge of that swirl, Lin Ruo Xi had to choose whether to use the pregnancy as leverage toward a clean break, a better settlement, and an exit from being a perpetual stand-in. Gu Mian, ever watchful, urged caution. "They will make you the symbol they want," she warned. "You must decide if you want to be symbolic or you want to be safe." The tension between symbolism and safety is what defines the stand-in contract. The women inside it are not merely playing characters on camera. They are bargaining with their own stories, trying to convert narrative power into concrete autonomy. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the system rewrites the contract out from under them. The next crescendo was the first legal maneuver, a divorce negotiation that read like a market reallocation. Shen Mo's legal team presented a package, a substantial settlement, a clause about privacy, an offer to fund relocation, and a neutral public statement. The terms were precise enough to be clinical and broadly generous enough to keep the cameras from asking the wrong questions. The strategy was obvious: buy silence, avoid reputation hemorrhage, and reassign public assets. But negotiation is not a mere arithmetic exercise when the other party has life changes she did not plan for. Lin Ruo Xi saw the offer as both exit and imprisonment. One path promised safety in numbers, the other promised autonomy with uncertainty. The system, for all its efficiency, does not build in a conscience. At the core of this world is a brutal truth. Power concentrates the ability to define what is true. When an elite man says a marriage is a brand, the market listens. When a woman claims her life as agency, she fights the language around her. The stand-in models are designed to make women learn the grammar of concession early. Be grateful, make graceful exits, accept a sealed settlement, and move on. But Lin Ruo Xi did not want a graceful exit that meant erasure. She wanted leverage enough to live. She began compiling evidence, logged messages, witnessed humiliations, payments for silence. She took photos of discrepancies in the staged events and saved them where a real future might reach them. She learned to argue not in the language of love, but in the language the system respected: law, finance, and market consequences. That is why the women planned the next act with a clarity that shocked even themselves. They would put their next move on the only stage that had ever listened, the public stage. They would create an event that forced transparency without turning themselves into victims. They would trade shock for leverage. They would risk spectacle to reclaim life. The plan required theater and timing, which meant more rehearsals, more doctors, and more negotiations. It required that the women understand how to manipulate the market and the men who dominated it. It required a new kind of ruthlessness, not cruelty, but a refusal to be managed. As the days blurred into orchestrated appearances and clandestine meetings, the city watched. Fans debated who was playing whom. Tabloids ran think pieces about celebrity marriages and the ritual of image maintenance, as if the problem were merely stylistic. They missed the structural truth. These marriages function like corporate instruments, optimized for investors and stakeholders, and often lethal to personal autonomy. The first part of this story ends not with a resolution, but with a choice poised in midair. The plan to disappear had been rehearsed. The gas incident tested the waters. The pregnancy introduced instability and new bargaining chips. Lawsuits were drafted in briefcases. Private planes prepared for sudden departure. System 12587 recalibrated its metrics and sent passive reminders. In the hallway outside Lin Ruo Xi's suite, a small group waited. 2 attorneys, Gu Mian, and a production assistant with a camera in his pocket. The night was heavy with humidity and the smell of jasmine from the balcony. Lin Ruo Xi moved like someone who had learned to carry multiple versions of herself at once: the adorable bride in photo shoots, the stoic public figure in canned interviews, and the woman who wanted to live with choices that were hers. She took a breath and looked at the faces gathered there. "If we go forward," she said, speaking quietly but with an economy that commanded attention, "we do it on our terms. We take what we need to live, and we leave the rest to them." Gu Mian nodded, but her eyes were grim.
Remember, she said, the system always has a backup. They will try to turn our risk into their show. A faint chime from a phone in the corner announced another System 12587 update. New variable detected. Pregnancy status change. Advice. Reassess mission objectives. Potential disruptions. High. That little message was an omen. The algorithm could not understand certain human resolves. It could not predict a mother's rage or a woman's sudden surrender to survival. It could not gauge the precise moment when a human being would refuse to be a balance sheet. From the balcony, city lights reflected in the water of a nearby pool, glittering like disciples of attention.
Somewhere beyond the city limits, men in executive chairs watched their portfolios tick up and down, measuring sentiment, calculating responses. Back in the suite, the women prepared for an act that would either set them free or burn down what little order they still had. On the bed lay a small printed spreadsheet, the plan, the contingencies, the payout thresholds. It read like a will for a life that had been half-lived. The light from a screen made numbers glow like ghostly promises. They had no illusion that the acts would be clean. They were not naive about risk. But the alternative, continuing to be managed, silenced, and sold, felt like a slow death. Outside, tires hummed on wet pavement. Inside, a kettle boiled and was turned off. A final call came in for Shen Mo, requesting cordially that he reconsider the public statement he had prepared. His assistant had reached out, saying gentler things. He might, the assistant insinuated, be willing to negotiate strongly toward a private settlement. The choice remained: accept the negotiated settlement and live quietly, or make a spectacle that demanded agency. It was not a moral parable, but a strategic crossroads. The women chose, together, to wager the system against itself. They were about to test whether the CEOBros really valued what they said they valued. They would force the market's hand, expose the calculus, and see what laid beneath the public statements of concern: genuine care or a quick reallocation of affection to the highest bidder. They stepped into the dark with a plan, a spreadsheet, a camera, and a machine that kept whispering numerical advice. System 12587 hummed on, impartial and hungry for data. The city watched. The meters ticked. The women moved. What happened next unspooled faster than any spreadsheet had predicted. What happened next unspooled faster than any spreadsheet had predicted. They executed the disappearance on a Wednesday, when the city was busy enough to stretch the rumor thin, but slow enough to let it thicken into a story. The plan depended on small technicalities: a timed social post, a faked message thread, a salted eyewitness account. Lin Ruo Xi's last public image before the blackout was an ordinary selfie. No drama, no farewell. It read like the sort of nothing that becomes everything when the feeds decide to read it as a last will. At 2 a.m, the phone lines lit. The assistant called a staged concerned friend, who then forwarded a panicked voice memo. A car was supposedly seen leaving the building. A nearby witness texted an overheated rumor to a gossip channel. System 12587 registered the anomalies: an uptick in searches, a sudden cluster of sympathy posts, a spike in donation clicks to a memorial fund they hadn't yet advertised. The algorithm flagged a high engagement opportunity. It suggested a cadence of supportive posts, a carefully worded public statement, and a designated spokesperson to control narrative drift. Shen Mo's team followed the checklist with the speed and composure of a practiced operation. He released a perfunctory statement crafted to be captured and repeated, deeply concerned, valuing family safety. He appeared on a live feed that the PR machine timed for maximum intimacy: soft lighting, remorseful pauses, a promise to cooperate fully with authorities. Cameras multiplied around his front door like obedient witnesses. The favorability needle spiked in the predictable arc: outrage, sympathy, investment. Xiao Ye, watching from the rival tower across the river, smelled opportunity. Rivalry in Yanjing rhymes with timing. He issued a brief note about privacy and respect, and then, with a smile, donated to the trending memorial cause from a corporate account. His gesture read like solidarity, but counted as market positioning.
In this city, the goodwill of a male public figure is convertible into social capital and into future leverage. Whether Xiao Ye acted out of sincerity or calculation was indefinito. The first 2 days were the perfect, terrible bloom of public mourning. Fans and influencers wrote elegiac threads. Brand managers repurposed images into tribute montages. The tabloids ran obituaries packed with half-true anecdotes about weekend tea parties and city charity. Editors called for expert commentators to explain the psychology of sudden loss among celebrities. In chat rooms, conspiracies formed like fungi under wet light. Kidnappings, secret elopements, staged misdirection. The city was a furnace of speculation. Beneath the spectacle, the women were not absent. They had rehearsed absence until it felt like a skill. In a rented clinic with an unlisted entrance, Lin Ruo Xi lay under a pale lamp while a nurse adjusted the IV. Gu Mian sat on a plastic chair against the wall, checking the watch and the feed, watching the data pour in like the pulse of an instrument. Cameras and PR had their own timeline. The women's lives, for a time, ran on a different clock. Breathing measured, decisions careful, contingency after contingency stacked like cards. The first real test arrived on the 3rd day when a small, unauthorized cameraman tried to breach the clinic's privacy. He had not been part of the plan, he had bought access. A scuffle followed. Someone recorded a pixelated clip of a woman with wet hair being helped out of a door, a detail briefly misread by the public as an authentic rescue. System 1257 flagged the clip as a dangerous deviation and suggested immediate countermeasures, controlled leaks, a staged apology, and official denial. Shen Mo's legal counsel prepared disclaimers and threat letters. His social channels pivoted to controlled mourning with the ease of a trained switch. That night, a hospital bed became the stage. Lin Ruo Xi appeared on a live feed in a way that was both deliberate and strangely vulnerable.
The production had arranged lighting that softened cameras, but not authenticity. Stuffed animals were planted on a nearby table to suggest tenderness. Her hair was messy. Makeup was minimal. The sound team modulated ambient noise, so the hush translated into pain. She looked at the camera and said nothing for a long time, which, in the era of scripted grief, read as depth. The public reaction split the way archives split under pressure. One half offered condolence, the other half smelled a setup. Analysts debated whether the feeds were too cinematic. Fans sent flowers. Opposing fans sent threads of suspicion like cold drafts. The algorithm treated all engagement as equal currency. System 12587 measured the sentiment and suggested new missions. Increase charitable messaging, schedule private interview, gate key influencers. Gu Mian, watching the data in a separate room with a different team, felt the taste of victory and the nausea of risk at once. The plan worked so well that it nearly stopped being under human control. Numbers, once released, take on an agency of their own. They move markets and minds. For the women, the flood of attention bought them breathing space. For everyone else, it provided opportunities to rearrange assets. Then the pregnancies to no longer be contained. The first test had been a fluke, the second a statistical anomaly. When both women saw 2 separate home tests light up, the floor under the plan shifted. They had treated bodies like variables until those bodies performed the one unstoppable human task. They made new life. The news of pregnancy, delivered in private rooms, on uncertain nights, with equal parts terror and strange joy, became something neither the algorithm nor the CEOBros could fully script. System 12587 whirred and rebooted its priorities. The mission objectives that had once been crisp and transactional blurred into messy human stakes. Maternity protection clauses, previously a box on a contract, suddenly mattered as lived realities. The algorithm appended advisories: reassess asset risk, consider long-term settlement, engage maternal health PR. It offered line items and suggested a new mission path: protect family narrative while preserving brand equity. For the women, pregnancy was both shield and chain. If used correctly, it could convert performative affection into legal leverage. It could make exit more expensive to orchestrate for their partners. It could make a settlement read like responsibility rather than restitution. But pregnancy also limited mobility. It increased visibility in ways that made disappearing again harder. It could invite more surveillance, more medical checks, more people in the room who would tally every ache and every purchase. Shen Mo reacted with the sort of speed that physics rewards. He consulted doctors, not to say whether he felt for the child, but to learn how the timeline would intersect with shareholder meetings and film shoots. He ordered legal clauses that could circumscribe custody, financial support, and the public presentation of a family unit. He held 2 scripts at once, one for internal counsel and one for the camera. In private, he offered Lin Ruo Xi a new contract. It was the sort of document that looks like compromise on paper: generous payments, housing provisions, healthcare guarantees. The language wrapped care in clauses. For the child's sake, the letter read in careful phrases, meant to be both persuasive and final. Whether he offered the package because of genuine concern, social pressure, or a calculated attempt to lock in future rights was indefinito. Gu Mian counseled differently. She liked leverage in forms that could be moved rather than sealed. She suggested a public reveal timed to be sympathetic but also unambiguous, a press conference not about mourning but about rights. Make it clear who we are, she advised, so no one can sell our stories as fiction. Her plan risked inflaming the same market forces that had nearly consumed them, but promised to reframe the narrative as one of agency, not victimhood. That choice, a public claim to motherhood or a negotiated hush, became the axis on which everything turned. The banquet where the showdown occurred had been organized as a truce, an arrangement dinner, the tabloids called it. Insiders called it a firewall. The guests were necessary players, a handful of board members, several influencers who could be trusted to shape tone, and two men who were both the cause and the company of the drama. Cameras lounged like vultures. The lighting was soft, conspiratorial. The menu was exquisite and precise, a delicious cover for strategy. Shen Mo entered with a face designed to read both sorrowful and composed. His hands clasped a prepared speech that rehearsed empathy in measured beats. Xiao Ye arrived later, relaxed in the way of men who know their brand will persist even when applause fades. Qiao Yan floated near the doorway with the ease of a man who understood that visibility was itself a currency. Lin Ruo Xi and Gu Mian sat opposite each other, sharing a look that mixed fatigue and something stranger, an awareness of the camera's hunger. The event opened with small talk, polite condolations, and then, as the main course arrived, a thin pause that acted like an invited stage. The cameras leaned in. It was then that the women moved. They did not move with the theatrics of accusations. They moved like accountants delivering a ledger. Lin Ruo Xi had compiled a file of text messages, schedules that proved rehearsals, bank statements that showed hush payments, and most damning for the curated image, video clips of staged rescues that had been edited to look spontaneous. Gu Mian had evidence of strategic placement of influencers and contracts showing how the favorability boosts were purchased. They had turned the instruments of their commodification into proof.
A hush fell that cameras strained to amplify. Shen Mo's smile, so practiced, faltered for a single frame. The room smelled of perfume and the metallic tang of panic. Board members glanced at their phones. The system began to scrabble for control. Shen Mo's first response was legal muscle. He asked for the files, suggested they were fabricated, intimated that airing them would harm the child's privacy. He used the word child with careful frequency. Private counsel talked about defamation and reputational damages. The men in suits began to talk in the language the system respected: liabilities, exposures, and market fallout. Fans on social platforms split into fervent camps. Protect Lin Ruo Xi trended beside skeptical feeds that claimed it's PR theater. In that moment, when the institution of image met the lived record of manipulation, System 12587 performed oddly for what it was. Its dashboards flickered, some parameters locked, others spiked. The algorithm, trained on cycles of scandal and repair, encountered files that didn't fit the expected pattern. It could model public sentiment and predict donation drives, but it had never been asked to simulate a counter-narrative generated by the very people it quantified. The glitch was not spectacular. It was the small, cold error when a machine finds no class to categorize a new kind of human protest. The banquet dissolved into negotiation. Cameras were ushered away or invited to linger depending on legal advice. Shen Mo offered a public statement promising to handle matters privately for the sake of the child and attached an outline for a formal settlement. Xiao Ye, sensing advantage in chaos, suggested a joint charity to honor family resilience and cued a donation of funds in a public speech. Qiao Yarn offered nothing overt but sent a quiet message of support. His role remained as much symbol as actor. Lin Ruo Xi received the written offer in the glow of candled light and felt once more the peculiar objectification of being negotiated. The terms were lucrative, a substantial lump sum, housing for 5 years, a trust fund, childcare provisions, and a confidentiality clause heavy enough to restrain a social storm. The legalese read like a promise that would buy silence at a cost. It would ensure comfort. It would also close doors. Gumian nodded toward the settlement with something like sorrow. "We take what protects us," she said, not trying to make it noble. "Then we build around that protection something that cannot be sealed by a signature." The crunch came when the system declared mission completion. System 12587, seeing the public documents and the counter-evidence, recalibrated its definition of reward. It converted mission success, maintain asset value and public trust, into a monetary transaction designed to anonymize the fallout.
A mission reward was unlocked, a programmatic settlement fund that, if accepted, would route money through corporate channels under the guise of family transition support. It came with a clause: accept it and agree to an orchestrated narrative that would both preserve Shen Mo's reputation and formalize a break. The reward had two glaring features. It was generous, and it required surrender. System 12587 presented it like an offer the women could either accept or refuse. The subtext read as always: refuse and be turned into a spectacle. For Lin Ruo Xi, the math was viciously simple and imperfect. Accept, and the immediate palpable risks, financial precarity, constant surveillance, would be lowered. Refuse, and the alternative was an open war with corporate lawyers and a public that flinched between pity and dismissal. The child complicated everything. The women's options were no longer solely about autonomy. They were about protection for the life inside them. Gu Mian's calculus leaned the other way. She saw a life where mobility, literal and social, had more long-term salvageability than the safe, quiet luxury of settlement. She had methods for converting a settlement into seed capital that could buy businesses abroad, create a network to hide in plain sight, or fund legal battles that might change the rules. Her vision was not unfeeling. It was strategic. They split the choice the way desperate people with long-range plans split a prize, with negotiation, division, and a brutal reckoning with priority. Lin Ruo Xi took the settlement and the relocation. She signed the papers with a hand that trembled and a face that did not. She chose relative safety and the messy privacy of a life rebuilt far from the public eye. Gu Mian refused the principal cash allotment that would have silenced her. She accepted instead a different kind of reward: partial funds, an ongoing credit line disguised as a consultancy budget, and most importantly, control over certain public narratives. She refused humiliation for quiet living. She wanted currency she could move. The choices were not tidy. One could claim Lin Ruo Xi sold out, or that Gu Mian chose fame. Both claims would be cruelly partial. Lin Ruo Xi's acceptance meant an exit from the game center. It did not guarantee happiness, but it did guarantee breathing room. Gu Mian's refusal meant continued exposure and risk, but also the possibility of changing the game from within, or at least owning a stake in the conversation. Shen Mo responded in the only ways he had left, with structural offerings and public gestures. He agreed to fund the settlement, to create a trust, and to push a statement that read as contrition. He did not, at least not publicly, admit malice. Whether his decisions came from real remorse, brand calculus, or the combination of both remained indefinite.
There was a final scene that played like a kind of documentation of the system itself, a press conference staged to announce the settlement and the transition of Lin Ruo Xi out of the public sphere. The media called it a graceful ending. The women called it a negotiated survival. Gu Mian, present but not signed away, used the conference as a platform. She stepped to a microphone and refused to perform the kind of contrition the cameras expected. Instead, she said, quietly and with a voice that steadied as it carried, "We are not props. We are negotiating lives." Her words did not dismantle the institutions at once. They did, however, broadcast a truth that the system had never monetized, that the people inside it had their own claims that could be turned into pressure. The feed splintered. Some praised her bravery, some accused her of opportunism. The algorithm fed on both. System 12587 logged the event as a market reset. In its language, the variables had been rearranged, assets reallocated, public sentiment rerouted, and a new mission queued: maintain brand stability post-settlement. For the men who bought affection as insurance, the model had worked to preserve core properties. For the women who had gamed the spectacle to buy breathing room, the model had yielded a different sort of victory. In the months that followed, life rearranged itself along new lines. Lin Ruo Xi took the relocation. The move was not cinematic. It was an extraction that felt like being unstitched and reassembled. She traded flashing lights for quiet mornings, curated feeds for a single small neighborhood, and the give and take of public opinion for private hospital visits and guardian lawyers. She used the settlement to secure an education fund, a small apartment for herself and the child, and a trust that would not be fully accessible to anyone but her. The move did not end the past, but it lowered its volume. Gu Mian stayed. She accepted a different currency: social capital, platform control, and a messy contract that let her speak. She took the partial funds, the consultancy money, and the permission, explicit or tacit, to remain in the market center. She launched a small studio that produced narratives about women's work and autonomy. She drew lines in public about contracts and consent. That position made her vulnerable in ways Lin Ruo Xi no longer was. It also gave Gu Mian a platform to try to shift terms for others like them. Shen Mo returned to his life of curated sorrow and enterprise. Publicly, he appeared chastened. His favorability dipped briefly and then resumed a slow climb. He signed a charitable check with a hand that cameras captured and analysts parsed for authenticity. Whether his course correction reflected interchange or merely brand preservation was again indefinito.
What was less ambiguous was the way his network tightened around him. New spokespeople, more careful staging, a few newly acquired family images to fill the vacancy.
The brand endured because the system had mechanisms to recreate itself. Xiao Ye quietly expanded his philanthropy as image diversification. He made appearances at maternal health events and photographed himself cradling babies that were not his. The optics were favorable, and the market liked that. Chao Yuan, meanwhile, kept floating in and out, part actor, part barometer of taste. In the wake of the spectacle, the industry made small adjustments. Contracts were rewritten to include more explicit maternity protections, lawyers learned new clauses, PR shops updated playbooks. System 12587 received patches and new rules to incorporate the lessons the scandal had forced upon it. It became marginally better at predicting public reaction to unexpected human elements. It learned to code for a variable labeled unplanned reproductive event. The system was adaptive. The industry learned to immunize itself in ways that still left people vulnerable. The emotional fallout, however, was less neat. Lin Ruo Xi wrestled with what she had traded for safety, the voice that had once used the company of the press to demand change. Gu Mian accumulated both followers and enemies, and the cost in surveillance was constant. They both learned, in different forms, a new grammar of survival. If you step back from the specific beats of cameras and contracts, what emerges is a method. The method of the CEOBro model is a pattern. Identify a person who can be made visible in a way that benefits a brand. Quantify that person's value with metrics. Design events that spike sympathy or scandal as needed. Use legal and financial instruments to preserve the core interest. And when challenged, deploy a combination of settlement and narrative to maintain equilibrium. There is also a second truth often missed in the candlelight of scandal. These arrangements do not produce simple villains and victims. They create systems that reward certain behaviors, punish others, and train participants to perform within a narrow set of acceptable roles. Men who manage affection like a portfolio can sometimes confuse habit for heart. Women who survive learn to speak the language of that portfolio, legalese, press statements, and algorithmic metrics, because those are the instruments the city responds to. That is the mechanical cruelty of it. The system converts intimacy into transaction, and then it punishes people who insist on different terms. It is why some women accept settlements and others refuse them. Both choices are rational responses to constrained options. Both are acts of survival, not simple moral verdicts. There were quieter ripples as well. A few junior executives changed their legal standard operating procedures. A handful of influencers demanded clearer consent clauses before joining stage narratives. Some fans, formerly transfixed by spectacle, grew warier about the lives they consumed as entertainment. But the engine, prized reputation, shareholder confidence, celebrities' convertible attention, kept chugging because it was profitable. What the story of Lin Ruo Xi and Gu Mian ultimately exposes is less about two men and more about a marketplace that turns relationships into assets. The offense is systemic. It lives in contract templates, in algorithms that score affection, and in cultural appetites that monetize intimacy. You can fault personalities, you can argue for better ethics, but unless the incentives change, the cycle will recur. Human beings will be invited to perform themselves into value, and the managers of that value will learn how to extract what they need with surgical efficiency. So where does accountability sit in such an architecture? It is not a tidy answer. It must be enacted across law, media literacy, and corporate governance. Contracts can be rewritten to protect bodily autonomy. PR shops can adopt ethical codes. Platforms can label sponsored narratives. But none of those measures alone breaks the model. The most decisive force is a cultural shift that refuses to commodify intimacy. It is a public that values privacy over spectacle, and a market that penalizes the conversion of people into line items. For the women in this story, the lessons are hard-won and contradictory. Lin Ruo Xi reclaimed life in a quieter form, insulating herself and her child from immediate extraction. Gu Mian stayed and tried to change the language from within, accepting vulnerability for the chance of longer-term impact. Both acts deserve empathy, not simplistic praise or contempt. They are examples of different survivals. The CEOBros, for their part, learned the cost of underestimating the people around them. They adjusted. Sometimes the adjustment looked like penance. Sometimes it was simply better risk management. Neither outcome resolves the moral deficit of treating marriage as a corporate instrument, but they do reveal a weakness in the model. Spectacle can be weaponized against itself. When the managed become the strategists, the machine stutters. This is the shocking truth the title promised. At the top, some marriages are indeed arranged with spreadsheets and clauses. They are instruments calibrated to produce predictable returns. They are also fragile,
because they depend on public faith in narratives that can be interrupted when those inside decide to stop performing. If you watch Hollywood or boardroom marriages and assume every smile is real, remember these mechanics. If you suspect a social display is more investment than intimacy, your suspicion is not merely cynicism, it's a kind of literacy. Systems of power will always invent ways to monetize human connection. The task is to notice where that monetization violates dignity and to demand better terms for those who live inside it.
Lin Ruo Xi sometimes walks by a quiet river now with a child at her side, and she counts small private victories. A day without a camera, the sound of a child's laughter that no algorithm can monetize. Gu Mian sits in a studio lined with contracts and monitors, speaking into microphones to insist that consent and compensation be explicit. Neither ending is perfect. Both are real. As for the city of Yanjing, it learned to update its KPIs. The tabloids found new stories. The algorithms adjusted their parameters. The method endured because markets are resilient. What changed, minutely and importantly, was the awareness that people could turn spectacle into leverage, and that leverage could, at moments, buy breathing room. If this story matters to you, if you recognize the pattern in celebrity gossip, in corporate marriages, or in news cycles, tell us in the comments where you've seen transactional intimacy in your own feed or in fiction. Share examples of narratives that felt like assets rather than relationships. If you want more breakdowns that pull apart the systems behind the scandal, subscribe and join the conversation.